So the last session of the MMC track, that will be Kenny also from IFS. He's the industry director at IFS. But I could just use this. Before we go and do that, here's the QR code for the questions. Has everyone got it? Do you want to hold it? All right. Don't forget the social media, and over to Kenny.
This one. Okay. So I'll use the microphone. Hi, you can hear me. So this is definitely the death session for this event. Right. We'll try and keep you awake, eh? Hopefully say something interesting. So anyway, introduce myself. I'm the VP for Construction Engineering for a company called IFS. And if you don't know who IFS are, what do we do? I'll give you one sentence. Now, we're basically a global software company, roughly $1 billion turnover business, roughly 6,000 people, operating across pretty much all the regions of the world. And we're very focused on, well, business software, kind of three areas: ERP, enterprise asset management, and service management are the three kind of main areas we focus on. I'm very focused on construction engineering, as it talks about here, which is one of our main focus industries. And we've got kind of lots of companies. I said, generally speaking, we're a specialist in what I call project and asset lifecycle software. So most of our customers are involved in either design or build or operate and maintain assets. And some of our construction and engineering customers, of course, do all of those processes, which is quite an interesting increasing trend towards that full asset lifecycle story, which you've talked a lot about in the last couple of days. So example customers, take UK Multiplex, Barclay Homes, for example. In that space, we've got people at Babcock building aircraft carriers, for example, and very, very complex assets. And we've got quite a lot of customers in I'll call it the modular, prefabricated, modern method of construction space. We had Legal and General Homes. Disappointingly, they decided to close the factory down. But modular housing, we've got people like Donaldson Timber Systems building off-site structures or wooden structures. We've got guys doing steel structures, concrete, et cetera, et cetera. We've got people like Ageko, you might know Ageko, Modulaire sometimes, so on. So we've got a lot of experience in what I call modern methods of construction in terms of our solutions, as well as traditional construction companies across pretty much every sector, including oil and gas, energy, renewables, et cetera. So that's enough about IFS. Very basic agenda. I'm going to briefly talk about what is the IFS definition of MMC, because I guess people might view it in different ways. Talk a bit about what's driving this accelerating trend, and a little bit about digital strategy. What do we need to do to support this changing, evolving strategy? So just talk about what is MMC. So this is kind of one slide to try and describe what I would say is MMC, and it depends on the words you want to use. So these are just some examples of words that people will talk about. Off-site construction, modular, for example, design for manufacturing. We should also put into this list, probably, as we talked about it yesterday, advanced work packages, and those. So they're all just different ways of kind of describing the same type of change, right? And of course, this could imply that it's all about manufacturing. We've talked to Lang O'Rourke, but it doesn't just need to be about manufacturing. When we talk about modern methods of construction, or a word I actually prefer is industrialized construction, it's about changing the way we work, right? It's about changing the way we execute projects from end to end, right from the very inception, right through to the ongoing operation and maintenance, and just doing things differently, challenging the way we work and trying to improve the performance of the business fundamentally, because there has to be a reason for doing this. And of course, what this is also suggesting is we tend to get a lot of discussion around modular house building, modular house builders, but it's actually applicable across the whole spectrum. We've just seen Lang O'Rourke talking about football stadiums, infrastructure, airports, whatever. It's really relevant for every sector, I would argue. So, and this is a slide I kind of think, well, we need to do things differently, and it kind of just tries to describe, it isn't something that's just about manufacturing, for example. It's something about how do we execute that project and asset life cycle using a more streamlined set of business processes, ultimately to drive a better project performance, to basically drive lower costs, higher margins, faster delivery, more predictable project delivery, all of those things. That's what we're trying to do, and also other drivers behind that. And this slide really depicted two things. We've talked a lot about BIM today, as we always do, digital design tools. Clearly, that's part of the story. I don't think you can probably really think about modern methods of construction without talking about using digital design tools. So those two are a key part of, we should be starting with a design, a digital design, and it should be, designed for manufacturing, or it should be designed for construction. It should be designing it in the way we want to construct it. Because if you don't think about the design at the beginning, then you're not going to be able to execute it properly in a manufacturing plant or assemble it in a structured way. And that's a very different way of thinking. If you've worked in the manufacturing industry, we talk about an engineering bill of material and we talk about a manufacturing bill of material. The manufacturing bill of material is how you're going to execute the work, right? It's the same content, but restructured. So this is the same discussion. And I like this picture, and I stole this from Jamie Johnson, which some of you may know, from Bryden Wood. And I thought it was a great picture of kind of what should a construction site look like. And it's very organized, isn't it? It's a bit like a factory, right? Lots of lovely laid out components, panels with structure, so we can basically assemble and pick and deploy proper kind of assembly of processes on a construction site. So that's why I say this is not just about having a factory. There's a tendency for people to think about MMC, it's about having a factory. Well, it doesn't have to be anything to do with a factory, actually. If you're the right type of business and you want to open a factory, that's fine, but it's quite high risks attached to that, as we've talked about today, is you've got to have a demand profile to support that pipeline. Otherwise, you're not going to lose money, like happened with Legal and General Homes. They haven't got enough supply pipeline to keep the factory busy, right? So they closed it down, right? So that's one of the biggest challenges. But we need, in my mind, to think of the construction site a bit like a final assembly operation in manufacturing and be much more structured. And we talked about much more productized in how we think about the design and the way we build assets. And that's, I think, the key thing. We've heard it many times. And I loved the Langer Rock presentation this morning. Thought it was just on the money. So great. Another way of thinking about this is we need to think about platforms. This is, again, a word that Jamie Johnson talks a lot about, but it's standardization. Making, making infinite number of things out of a set of standard components, right? Lego, right? Why do we have to have different lengths of beams every time? We can make things out of an infinite number of bits, right? So that's a really key part of changing the way we think and driving repetitive processes, driving, reduced cost and so on. And standardization and lean, of course, is part of that, doing things just in time, removing waste. So what's driving this trend? Well, probably no surprise in this. Increased competition. What's interesting, that what we're seeing in my experience is we're seeing companies enter the construction marketplace that weren't previously in this market. We just talked about Legal in General, right? Well, there's a bank, right, or a financial company entering the construction industry. Interesting. You're probably familiar with the joint venture, the joint company between Skanska and IKEA, right? They're building houses as a joint thing. And if you think about that, Skanska construction company, who are here, I'm not sure they're still here, but IKEA, what are IKEA good at? Standardization, right? The kits that you build in your house is all about having a kit of parts with a set of instructions and how to assemble it. Why should construction be any different? So that meeting of minds between traditional construction and a kitting supply chain driven organization who understands standardization to a ridiculous level, right? If you think of IKEA, all the parts are the same, aren't they, right? The same components are used in virtually everything you build, right? So that's the kind of mindset that we need to do. So there's companies entering this market who have never been in construction before, right? Who are going to challenge traditional construction, but they're going to think differently, right? One of my customers, Babcock, build aircraft carriers, right? Shipyard. They were building modules, M&E modules for Terminal 5, right? Because they've got the structure and skills to build anything, right? It doesn't matter. So they've never been in construction before, but they're actually well structured to do this job probably in a smarter way than most construction companies are, because they're very structured in their thinking. What else? Government targets, we've talked about BIM, but I think we are seeing MMC being adopted by government now and driving an agenda that will probably force companies to adopt MMC principles. It'll probably be mandated. Obviously, this is a key one. Everyone knows that project margins are not great and costs are not great. And of course, And that's not good, is it? And of course, we need to drive productivity up. It was interesting, in the session yesterday on AWP, somebody put up a slide saying that the productivity of a typical tradesman on site is roughly 30%, right? So 70% of the time they're spending on construction is actually spent not doing the work they should be doing. That is appalling, right? So you have to ask yourself the question, why is it so bad, right? So it's about planning better, being more organized. So there's really something in there. I'm not going to try and say we've got all the answers, but we need to do something to improve that and change the way we work. Sustainability, obviously we can't ignore this, a key part of this agenda. Aging workforce and skill shortages, this is cited as one of the big drivers for MMC. We haven't got the skills. We've got an aging workforce. People like me are going to retire soon, right? But there's a lot of people. And of course, we haven't got the next generation coming through wanting to, in general, wanting to work in this sector, right? So it's only going to get worse, right? So again, when I spoke to, for example, Legal and General Homes, they opened a factory to build houses. Every single person in that factory was a school leaver, pretty much, right? Just brought in from school, trained how to assemble and build a house, right? In a factory environment. They didn't need skilled electricians, tradesmen, cost was much lower, supply of labour. So I think this is essential if we're going to deal with the skill shortage. Obviously, project delivery performance on time, predictable, high quality, all these things we need to be better at. Obviously, safety again is a key driver, because if you're doing MMC, you should be having less people working at height, for example, there should be less accidents and so on. And obviously, material supply has been a challenge with COVID. It's still a challenge, I think, and inflation. So there are many drivers that are forcing us to change the way we work and try and push the, ultimately it's about making money, isn't it? We need better, higher project margins, and we need to find a way to deal with that issue. And this is, I think, critical. Now, so how does digital technologies play in this space then? And obviously I work for IFS and I'm kind of biased, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we see in terms of where are you now in terms of your digital landscape, your business system landscape, and what might you need to be thinking about if you want to enable this transformation. So if we think about, you have a business system in place in this industry which covers that kind of life cycle depending what type of company you are. And what we typically see is you'll have a whole load of business applications, what are biased under here, traditional construction business applications that everyone's got, and probably a lot more than is on this list here, right? But there's things like business development, CRM, risk management, project planning, variation control, project cost control, etc. All the things you would normally live and breathe. And of course, that isn't all one color, right? In most people's business system, it's usually a collection of 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 different business systems glued together with sticky tape, right? And probably about 5,000 Excel spreadsheets, right? That's what it actually looks like in most businesses I speak to, right? So it's actually a non-integrated mess. I call it a patchwork quilt, right? So that's where a lot of companies are today. And I think that needs to be challenged anyway before we even talk about how do you transition to a different way of working, right? So what we would say here is we need to think about, if we're going to go to a modular offsite model or an MMC model, we need to think a bit differently. And I'll just take the first example here. In construction companies, we tend to think about bills of quantities, yeah? It's the way we kind of think. In manufacturing companies, we tend to think about bills of materials, right? And part numbers and inventory control, right? Those are alien terms to most construction companies. They will look at you as if you've got a strange brain if you mention those words, right? But in my head, we need to join those worlds together, right? We need a hybrid between those two worlds, right? So we need to think about standardization, as Langerock talked about, part numbering, proper supply chain management. This is a logistics problem now about moving things around, knowing where things are, and be able to kit and pick and do material availability checking. How can you do that if you don't have inventory control? I mean, it's impossible, really. So we wonder why we've got poor productivity on a construction site when you go, well, no wonder, because we can't find anything. We haven't actually even recorded it's arrived in some cases. So we wander around the site looking for stuff and found it's disappeared or it never arrived or whatever, right? So there's a lot of principles here that we need to be embracing in I'll call this hybrid model. And of course, that's a challenge, because how does an organization who's got no understanding and no business systems to support any of these principles in their existing business system landscape today, how do they make that transition? The answer is not very easily, right? So we need to do something different. So if you talk about MMC, I would say MMC is needs a hybrid model, right? And that's how we talk about changing the way we think, changing the way we work. Now, Langer Rock sounds like have already made that transition. Or that's the journey you're on, right? And they're talking about part numbering, standardization, and productizing their business, right? And I think that's the way we need to start thinking. So I'm going to do what I wouldn't normally do and give you an example of IFS here, just to give you an idea, to give you a clue of what this could look like in a modern business system landscape. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm going to rattle through this just to give you a flavor. But this is IFS. This is what we call IFS Cloud. It's an ERP system, end-to-end solution, and this is, you arrive in IFS and you arrive in what's called a lobby, and every one of these buttons can be run on a mobile phone or a tablet or a PC. It's completely platform independent, and you can choose as much or as little of that scope as you want. So you arrive here, and so if you think about the start of any project, you start with some bidding process, and you might start with an estimate, and this is an estimating module in IFS, and it's got quantities, and we can put rates, and we can have a bill of quantities driving an estimate if you want to start there, and if you want to take your takeoff off your BIM model, you could push the data in here and drive an estimate. So it's now in one common data. And then linked to that, we could drive a contract to the client, what we call a sales contract. This is your contract with your revenue, which is now linked to your bill of quantities that's going to drive your revenue. And then we need a project, which is also linked into that estimating process. So here's my work breakdown structure with the phasing of the project, and also a up-to-date cost view of everything it's going to cost, right from the estimate all the way through to my actuals and my commitments and so on, all real time, all happening from one integrated platform. And then, of course, when we talk about a physical view, we need to take the BIM model and we need to integrate it into this world somehow, right? And we could bring it into a bill of quantities, or we could take it into what we call a deliverable structure, which is this is a project bill of material, effectively, right? So this is saying these are all the things, all the structures and part numbers we need to execute this project, which could come directly from the BIM model, right? So if I took Babcock as an example, who just built the 2 aircraft carriers as an example of this, they built those 2 aircraft carriers using exactly what I'm showing you here. And their deliverable structure was kind of big, right? Because every single thing that's in that aircraft carrier is in that deliverable structure. Every single cable, everything, valve, pump, you name it, right? So they have got a complete as designed, which eventually becomes a complete as built structure for that carrier, all with a complete end-to-end process, right? So that's what's possible if you want to implement this correctly. And that is linked not just into the design status, through to driving material planning, through to driving shipping planning, through to installation. So we're managing that process through all the stages of an MMC process: design, manufacture, buy, install, or ship and install, and hand over to maintenance, right? All from one integrated process. And of course, we can drive from that a material plan directly. So what do we need to buy, and when do we need to buy all the bits? Synchronized with the timeline. What do we need to manufacture? What do we need to install? All synchronized with the timeline. So here's the Gantt, here's the WBS with the timeline. This would be integrated to Primavera in Babcock's case directly, or integrated to Asta, for example. So the program is completely integrated and it's driving into everything: material plan, the installation plan, the shipping plan, everything's linked, right? Then from a user perspective, regardless, depending on which department you belong to, if you're procurement, you can see in one page what you need to do, what's driving your actions. If you're manufacturing, you get the same world. If you're in engineering, you get the same view. So every function will have a different perspective, but it's the same set of data. And then, then we get into sort of in the manufacturing world, visual shop order planning if you're manufacturing. Key thing here is in a manufacturing world, what you're doing, and this is true of every manufacturing company I've ever spoken to or worked with, before you make anything in a manufacturing plant, what do? You check whether you've got enough material to do the work. You check if you've got enough labor to do the work. You check if you've got the equipment and machinery to do the work. And if it's not available, you don't launch the job, right? because otherwise it's just going to stop, right? Is that what happens in a construction site? Not normally. We launch the work and hope that the things are going to be there, right? And then we wonder why it's stopped, or we wonder why we've got guys sitting around for 70% of their time not doing work because some constraint pops up, the equipment's not there, the plant's not there, the materials are not there, et cetera, et cetera. So if we can get that mindset and methodology into a construction site, then it would be a lot slicker. So, and then we have a thing called a shop order in manufacturing. I won't bore you with the details. There's the picking list, right? These are all the materials I need to make this thing, right? The quantities, the dates. We check availability. Same principle would apply on the site. And then we do some shipping. We ship the items to site. And then we move into installation process. We need installation packages, same data. And we're now going to generate what we call installation packages. In Babcock's case, this was moving onto the physical vessel, for example. So every single thing they installed during the build of the aircraft tracking was done through a work package in IFS with labor availability, material checking, quality, et cetera, et cetera. And then we get a thing called a work task, which is the thing we do the installation off the back of. That can be put on a tablet because it's all completely platform independent. We can drive the work to list to the users on a phone or a tablet. They do the work, they record what they've done. They've got their work to list there, da-da-da. And of course, alternatively, if you're a construction business and you're doing subcontract, you're a subcontract model and you're subcontracting this work as a package of work and you're not self-performed like a shipyard, then you would be generating a subcontract package to do the work or a set of subcontract packages. They're also linked into the same data, right? So it doesn't matter whether I'm a self-perform or a subcontract or a mix of both, it's all completely integrated. So a lot of, for example, a lot of off-site manufacturers see will do the manufacturing, but when it comes to installation, they'll use subcontractors to do the install and fit on site, right? So again, this is where you'd use subcontract for the install element of work, right? But it's all integrated back to the same project, et cetera, et cetera. And ultimately, at the end of that, of course, you want to be able to track what it's costing you. And how does that compare to your budget? And what's my latest forecast? So all of this is real time. Every time I do something here, a raise, a requisition, a purchase order, a subcontract, a work package, a issue material, every single time, a timesheet, every single time, these numbers will change instantaneously, right? So I know exactly where we are on the project at any second and any day, right? Every cost. And then that's what we call a live view, a real-time live view. And then there's, of course, the more traditional view of saying I want to look at it at a period end, doing a month-end CVR or project cost report. Now, ultimately, what that means, if I'm the CEO of this organization, I come in the morning and I want to see how's my business performing, you can go into this, right? Something like this. So these are configurable. Say, there's all my projects. What have I got here? Up to do 4 in this example. I'm looking at for one project manager. I can slice it by division, by sector, by customer, client, whatever. So this guy here, that's my son, who also works for IFS, has got 4 projects. And these are the risks that are associated with those 4 projects. These are how his 4 projects are performing. Oh, some of them are red, right? From an operational point of view, from a delivery point of view, from a cost control, from a margin point of view. So we can go from here and we click on that project. It doesn't look very nice. I can drill down into, oh, let's look at that one project now. Why is it red? Not a great example, but it says we're expected to make 13.66% margin. Wow, does anyone here make 13.66% margin? Probably not, but anyway. And we're actually doing really badly because we're only going to make 13.19% for some. So it's not a great example, but that's the principle. It's red because we're actually below what we said we're going to make, right? In this particular example. And then we can drill down and say, well, why is it red? Here's all my cost variances. And here's all my variations. Here's all my variances. Here's et cetera, et cetera. Here's my spread. All the information, and everything here is drillable. So I can take any of these numbers and drill straight into the source data, and we're done. And then we can do month-end reporting, CVR type reporting directly from system. And we can then also think about, of course, the installation deliverables installation process. And we can then create from this data, if we want to, automatically the as delivered structure into maintenance, right? Automatically. Digital handover, you want to call it that? So now we're creating, here's our asset structure of what we've built, handing it over to the client, or taking it on ourselves to provide facilities and service management. And it's all sitting there. So here's my asset that I built that's come from that whole process. This is a hospital with all the modules we built, and and this could be a very detailed asset structure with all the serial numbers, etc. And then we can carry out the normal maintenance. So that's the kind of process. So that's just to give you a flavour kind of for the art of the possible, because this is what we do every day in life. Right? We're implementing integrated business systems to transform an organization from having 20 business systems or 100 business systems to maybe 5, right? And get rid of 1,000 Excel spreadsheets. That's what we do for a living every day in life. So it's transformational in terms of what we're trying to do. So back to MMC. I don't think this is an optional for organizations. This is happening and going to accelerate. We need to change the way we work, and we need the right business architecture and processes in place to make that transformation. So we need to think about what that means to our organization. And if we do that, obviously we're going to think about, getting lots of benefits, and we're going to generate, improved business performance, these types of things here, right? And that's really what ultimately we're trying to achieve, is change the way we work, change the processes, get smarter, and be more competitive, and make our organizations more sustainable and agile going forward. That's kind of the bottom line. So thank you for listening. I will be quiet.